The moment Theodore Ashford saw the boy standing in the rain outside his restaurant window, something shifted in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know why. He told himself later it was just the cold November air pressing through the glass, the way the child stood perfectly still while everyone else on that Halifax street hurried past with their umbrellas and their errands. But that was a lie, Theodore told himself for exactly 11 minutes before the boy walked through the door and changed everything. The boy was small for his age, maybe 10, maybe 11, the kind of age where kids still have soft faces, but their eyes have started to harden into something more careful. He was wearing a jacket that was at least 2 sizes too large, the sleeves swallowing his hands, and his shoes had separated at the toe on the left foot, so that each step made a faint flapping sound against the hardwood floor of Harrington's. Theodore noticed all of this because Theodore noticed everything. He had built 3 companies from the ground up by noticing things other people walked past. "We're not open yet," said the hostess, Margot, in a tone that was not unkind but left no room for argument. "I know," the boy said. "I just need to use the washroom, please." Theodore was sitting at his usual corner table with a coffee, and the morning's numbers from his Vancouver office spread out in front of him. He came early on Tuesdays. He liked the quiet. He looked up from his papers and watched the boy. "Let him," Theodore said. Margot glanced at him, then nodded, and the boy disappeared down the hall toward the back. Theodore returned to his papers. He read the same sentence 4 times and didn't absorb a single word of it. When the boy came back, he stopped near the door, then hesitated. Theodore could see him looking at the breadbasket on the host stand, the leftover dinner rolls. Margot put out before service started, the ones she threw away if they weren't eaten. The boy stared at them the way a person stares at something they want very much, but have decided they are not allowed to want. "Sit down," Theodore said. It came out rougher than he intended. The boy looked at him. "I mean, if you'd like, there's coffee. Well, not coffee, but there's hot chocolate. The kitchen makes it from scratch on Tuesday mornings. I don't know why Tuesdays specifically." The boy sat down across from him. Not in the way children usually did, all elbows and fidgeting, but carefully, like he was aware that chairs in places like this were not intended for people like him. "What's your name?" Theodore asked. "Birch," the boy said. "Birch," Theodore repeated it. "That's an unusual name." "My mom liked trees," Birch said, and something in the way he said it, past tense, quiet, no explanation offered, made Theodore set down his pen. "I'm Theodore." "I know," Birch said. "You're the man who owns the building on Granville Street, the one they put up the scaffold on last spring. My mom used to walk past it every day on the way to work." Theodore studied him. "How do you know that?" Birch shrugged one shoulder. She pointed it out. She said the man who built it used to eat breakfast at the same place every morning and leave a $20 tip even when he only had coffee. Theodore was quiet for a moment. He had no memory of anyone watching him. He never did. "Where does your mom work now?" Birch looked down at the tablecloth. He pressed his thumb against a small crease in the linen. Back and forth, back and forth. "She doesn't," he said. "She got sick. She's at the hospital. I'm sorry to hear that. She's been there for 6 weeks. Birch said it the way kids said things that were enormous, flatly, because enormous things didn't fit inside normal expressions. "My Aunt Sybil is staying with me, but she has to go back to Moncton on Friday. She has her own kids." Margot appeared with a mug of hot chocolate and set it in front of Birch without a word. He looked up at her with an expression so unguarded and grateful that she had to turn away quickly and find something to do at the other end of the room. Birch wrapped both hands around the mug. The sleeves of his oversized jacket fell back, and Theodore saw, on the boy's right wrist, a thin cord bracelet, pale blue and white, the kind you made from embroidery floss, knotted at the end, worn nearly through. Theodore almost said nothing. Then he said, "That's a nice bracelet." Birch looked down at it. "My mom made it. She makes them for people, or she used to." He touched it with 2 fingers lightly. "She has a whole kit, threads in like 40 colors. She said one day she wanted to open a little shop." Theodore felt something strange move through him. He reached into his jacket pocket and set his phone on the table, screen down, the way he always did when he wanted to think clearly. "What's your mom's name?" he asked. His voice came out carefully level. Birch looked at him with those careful, hardened eyes. "Why? I'm asking." "A beat, then. Laurel," Birch said. "Laurel Vane." The floor did not disappear beneath Theodore Ashford's feet. That was not how it happened. What happened was quieter than that, and more permanent. It was the sensation of a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut. For so long he had forgotten it was a lock at all. Laurel Vane. He had not said that name aloud in 4 years. He had said it in his own head every single day. Theodore Ashford had not always been the kind of man who sat alone at corner tables. There had been a time, a different time, a time that felt like it belonged to someone else's biography, when he had been the kind of man who arrived places with someone beside him, when he had been the kind of man who left parties early because there was somewhere better to be, someone better to be with. He had met Laurel at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. He had gone out of obligation. She had gone because she genuinely cared, which was something he could tell within the first 4 minutes of speaking to her, and which he found so refreshing that he forgot to be charming, and was simply honest instead. She had laughed at something he said that was not particularly funny, but was true, and he had thought, "There you are." As though he had been looking for her specifically, and had only just realized it. They were together for 2.5 years. He had been happy in a way that embarrassed him slightly to remember, because it was not a complicated or sophisticated happiness. It was just the ordinary happiness of someone who had found the right person and knew it. And then. He still didn't fully understand the and then. That was the part that had lived in him like a splinter for 4 years. Not the ending itself, but the fact that he'd never been able to make sense of it. She had ended things in a phone call. 11 minutes long. She had said that she was sorry, that she loved him, that this was not about him, that she needed to go. He had asked her what she meant. She had said she couldn't explain. He had asked her where she was going. She had said she didn't know yet. He had called back 17 times in the next 2 days. Her number had been disconnected. He had tried to find her. He was a man with resources, and he had used all of them. He had found nothing. She had simply ceased to exist, the way people only cease to exist when they were determined to. He had eventually stopped, not because he wanted to, because continuing to look felt like something that would hollow him out entirely if he let it. He had not understood. He still did not understand. But he had learned to carry it the way you learn to carry a thing when setting it down was not an option. "What hospital?" Theodore asked. Birch looked at him strangely. "The QI. Why? How old are you, Birch?" The boy's eyes narrowed out slightly. He was smart. Theodore could see him calculating something, trying to figure out what the right answer was, or what these questions added up to. 11, he said finally. 11. Theodore did the arithmetic he had already been doing since the moment the boy said his mother's name. He did it twice to make sure. Laurel had left 4 years ago. Birch was 11, which meant that when she left, Birch had been 7, which meant that when they were together, when Theodore had been happy in that embarrassingly uncomplicated way, she had a 7-year-old son. A son she had never mentioned, a son she had kept entirely separate from every part of their life together. Why? The question arrived in him like something dropped from a height. Why? "Birch," he said, and he heard something shift in his own voice, something he couldn't quite control. "Did your mother ever? Did she ever mention me?" Birch was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hot chocolate. Then he looked at Theodore. "She has a photograph," he said, "in a wooden box under her bed. There's a bunch of stuff in it, letters and things, and a photograph of her with a man." He paused. "She never told me who he was, but she looked at it sometimes when she thought I was asleep." Theodore set both hands flat on the table. He needed the solidity of it. "And the bracelet," he said. "The one on your wrist, does she have one too?" Birch touched his wrist again, reflexively. Then his expression did something complicated. "How did you know that?" "Because I was with her when she learned to make them. Because we spent a Saturday afternoon in her apartment, with embroidery floss in 40 colors spread out across the kitchen floor, and she said it was the most relaxing thing she'd ever done, and I laughed at her and she threw a skein of thread at my head. Because I left before she finished mine, and she mailed it to my office 2 weeks later in an envelope with no return address and a note that just said, 'Here, I finished it.'" "I have one too," Theodore said quietly. He reached under the cuff of his dress shirt and pulled it back slightly. Against his wrist, faded and worn and fraying at one end, was a bracelet made of pale blue and white embroidery floss. He hadn't taken it off in 4 years. He had worn it under his shirt like something he was ashamed of, or something he was protecting. He was still not entirely sure which. Birch stared at it. Then Birch stared at Theodore. The restaurant had begun to fill up around them. The early lunch crowd, the business people, the couples. The noise of a normal Tuesday had moved in and surrounded their corner table without either of them noticing. "I need to go to the hospital," Theodore said. "Will you take me?" Birch did not say yes right away. He asked Theodore 3 questions first. Careful, precise questions that told Theodore a great deal about what kind of mother Laurel Vane had been, because only a mother who had taught her child to think clearly and trust carefully produced a child who asked questions like that before agreeing to anything. He asked, "How do I know you're not going to make things worse for her?" He asked, "If she didn't want you to find her, what makes you think she wants you to find her now?" And then, most quietly, "What if she tells you to leave?" Theodore had answered each question honestly, which included admitting that he didn't know the answer to the second one, and that the third one terrified him. Birch had listened to all of this. Then he had finished his hot chocolate, set down the mug with both hands, and said, "Okay." The QEI Health Sciences Center was 20 minutes from Harrington's by cab. Birch sat beside Theodore and looked out the window and said almost nothing, which Theodore respected. He was not a man who filled silences unnecessarily himself. What Birch did say about halfway there was, "She's not going to die." Theodore looked at him. "People keep looking at me like she's going to die," Birch said. "She's not. She just needs surgery, and then she needs time. She told me herself. She said, 'Birch, I did not survive everything I survived just to leave you now.'" Theodore absorbed this. "What did she survive?" Birch looked at him sideways. "She'll tell you herself," he said.
"If she wants to."
The room was on the 4th floor, near the end of a corridor that smelled of institutional cleaning fluid, and something beneath it, something warmer, like someone had brought in flowers recently. Room 412. Birch pushed the door open and went in first, and Theodore stood in the doorway. She was smaller than he remembered. That was his first thought, and he knew it was foolish because people didn't get smaller, but she seemed reduced in some way, the way people seemed reduced when they had been frightened for a long time. She was sitting up in the bed with a book face down in her lap, and she was looking at Birch with that particular expression parents had, relieved, exasperated, loving. When she saw Theodore in the door behind him, the book fell off the bed. Neither of them moved to pick it up. "Birch," she said very quietly. "I know," Birch said. "But Mom," he said it simply, like it was a complete sentence, like it was the only argument necessary. Laurel looked at Theodore. Theodore looked at Laurel. 4 years, he thought. 4 years, and she still looked like herself, like the woman who had thrown embroidery thread at his head and laughed at things that weren't particularly funny but were true. "Hi," she said. Her voice was steady. The rest of her was not. "Hi," Theodore said. Birch pulled a chair from the corner of the room, set it beside the bed, and then went and sat in the other chair by the window with his hot chocolate still in his hand. He had carried it from the restaurant the entire way, somehow without spilling it, and opened his library book and made it extremely clear, without saying a single word, that he was not leaving. Theodore sat down in the chair beside the bed. "You should know," Laurel said before he could speak, "that I'm going to explain everything. I'm not going to ask you to understand it, and I'm not going to ask you to forgive it, but you deserve to know what actually happened." "Okay," Theodore said. She told him. "It had started," she said, "with a man named Gerald Fitch." Theodore recognized the name immediately. Gerald Fitch had been a business partner of Theodore's for 3 years, a silent investor in the Granville Street development, a man Theodore had trusted. A man Theodore had introduced to Laurel at a company dinner years ago, without thinking twice about it. What Theodore had not known was what Gerald Fitch had done after that dinner. He had approached Laurel privately, 6 weeks before she disappeared. He had come to her apartment. He had told her things, specific things, documented things, about Theodore's company, about financial records, about what Fitch claimed were illegal dealings that Theodore was about to be investigated for. He had told her that she would be swept up in it, that her assets would be frozen. That Birch, her 7-year-old son, who she had been raising alone since Bitch's father left before he was born, would have nowhere stable to go. And then Fitch had told her that if she disappeared quietly, he would make sure none of it touched her or her son. "I believed him," Laurel said. She said it without flinching, but her hands tightened on the blanket. "I know how that sounds, But Birch was 7, and I had nothing. No savings, no family close by, nobody who could take him if something happened to me. Fitch showed me papers, documents. I wasn't financially sophisticated enough to know if they were real. They weren't real, Theodore said. I know that now. Fitch was the one under investigation. It's why he needed me discredited. He needed people to believe the company was compromised. I know, Laurel said. I found out 2 years later. After we'd already been gone for 2 years. After I'd already built Birch a new life in Halifax and he'd already started school here and I couldn't. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I couldn't undo it by then. I told myself I couldn't. Maybe that was a lie I needed to believe. Theodore was quiet for a moment. Why didn't you come back, even after you knew? Laurel looked at him directly. Because I had left you in a phone call, Theodore. 11 minutes. I had disappeared on you without explanation, and I had let you call me 17 times and not answered. By the time I knew the truth, I had already done something unforgivable, and I didn't know how to show up at your door and ask you to. That was not your decision to make for me, Theodore said. His voice came out low and even. That was mine. She was quiet. I would have. He stopped, tried again. You should have let me decide. I know, she said, very quietly. I know that. From across the room, Birch turned a page of his book. He was very deliberately not looking at them. Theodore recognized this as an act of considerable tact for an 11-year-old. The surgery, Theodore said. What is it? Cardiac. There's a valve issue. It's been there for a while. I didn't have good medical coverage. Birch's Aunt Sybil found a good surgeon here, finally. When? Thursday. I'll pay for it, Theodore said immediately. Theodore, I'm not asking, he said. I'm telling you, this is not a conversation. The surgery is covered. He paused. Whatever comes after, rehabilitation, recovery, Birch's schooling, all of it. Laurel looked at him with something that was not quite relief, and not quite grief, and not quite hope. Some compound of all three that didn't have its own word in English. You don't owe me anything, she said. I know I don't, Theodore said. That's not what this is. But she didn't say no. The surgery was on Thursday. Theodore was in the waiting room from 6:30 in the morning. Birch arrived at 7 with Aunt Sybil, who was a compact, watchful woman from Moncton, who looked at Theodore for a long moment when they were introduced and then said, Laurel talked about you. Just that. No elaboration. She sat down across from him and picked up a magazine and seemed to reach some private conclusion. Birch sat beside Theodore. After a while he fell asleep with his head at an odd angle, and Theodore quietly moved so the boy's head was resting against his arm instead of the hard plastic armrest. He sat very still after that and did not move for quite some time. The surgery took 4 hours and 20 minutes. When the surgeon came out and said it had gone well, valve replaced, heart strong, excellent prognosis, Birch woke up instantly, as though he had not been asleep at all, and his face did something that cracked open entirely for just a moment before he pulled it back together. I told you, he said, to no one in particular. I told you she wasn't going to leave me. In the weeks after, things happened slowly, and then all at once, the way recovery worked, the way trust worked, the way things that had been broken for a long time took more than a morning to reassemble. Theodore came to the hospital every day. At first he sat with Laurel and they talked, not about the lost years, not at first, but about smaller things. Halifax in November, the restaurant on the corner, books, the specific quality of light in the afternoon, in that particular 4th-floor room. He brought coffee from the place down the street that she'd mentioned she liked. She told him about Birch's school, his friends, the way he had adapted to Halifax with the particular resilience of a child who had learned early that home was a person and not a place. Birch accepted Theodore's presence with a pragmatism that was at once charming and slightly unnerving. He asked questions directly. He wanted to know about the buildings Theodore had constructed, specifically the engineering of them, which led to a long conversation about load-bearing walls that Theodore had not anticipated enjoying as much as he did. He was protective of his mother in ways that were entirely matter-of-fact. He didn't like her to be tired. He noticed when conversations were draining her before she noticed herself. He would say simply, I think my mom needs to rest now, and look at Theodore with those careful 11-year-old eyes until Theodore stood up and said goodnight. Laurel came home from the hospital on a gray Tuesday afternoon, which felt appropriate. Theodore drove them, Birch in the back seat with his library book, Laurel in the front being quietly overwhelmed by the strangeness of being in a car again, moving through the city. She looked at the buildings as they went past. "That one's yours," she said, when they passed the Granville Street development. "Fully occupied now, its windows lit." "Yes," Theodore said. "It's good work," she said. "It looks like something built to last." He kept his eyes on the road, but he felt it, the phrase landing somewhere in him, settling. Her apartment was small and warm, with a bookshelf that took up most of one wall, and Birch's drawings pinned along the hallway, and a coffee table with a scratch along one edge that told a story Birch apparently refused to explain. Theodore carried things up from the car. He made sure the heat was working. He checked the fridge and went out to get groceries without announcing he was doing so, and when he came back, Birch was at the kitchen table doing homework, and Laurel was on the sofa with a blanket over her legs, and they both looked up when he came in like it was a completely normal thing, like this was something that had always happened. He did not stay long. He said goodnight at the door. Laurel walked him out to the hallway. She leaned against the doorframe and looked at him in that way she'd always had of looking at him, like she was reading something, like she was checking something against an internal record. "Theodore," she said. I'm sorry." He looked at her, at this woman who had sent him a bracelet in an envelope with no return address, who had raised an extraordinary child alone in a city she'd chosen for safety rather than love, who had, out of fear and a terrible miscalculation and perhaps something else, perhaps the specific cruelty of believing oneself undeserving of being returned to, kept herself hidden from him for 4 years. "I know," he said, "that's all. Just, I know. What would you like me to say?" She was quiet. "I'm not angry anymore," Theodore said, which was true. He had been. He had been for years, quietly, underneath everything else. The particular grinding anger of not understanding, of having been left without reason. But he looked at her now, and what he felt was not anger. What he felt was something simpler and more frightening than anger. I would like it if we." He stopped. He was not a man who stumbled over sentences often. "I'd like to find out what's still there," he said finally. "If anything, I think something is, but I don't want to assume." Laurel looked at him for a long moment. "Something is," she said. He nodded. He put his hands in his coat pockets. He said, "Good, okay, good." She almost smiled. "You're very articulate." "Thank you, I try." She did smile then, a real one, the kind he'd forgotten the specific quality of, warm and a little crooked at the right corner. He felt something in him that had been holding its breath for 4 years, let out a long, slow exhale. "Good night, Theodore," she said. "Good night, Laurel." He walked back down the corridor and pushed through the door to the stairs. Behind him, he heard the apartment door close. He stood in the stairwell for a moment in the quiet. On his wrist, beneath his sleeve, the pale blue bracelet that had been with him for 4 years pressed against his skin the way it always did, familiar as a heartbeat, constant as a name. He walked down the stairs and out into the Halifax night, where the November air was cold and clean, and the city was lit up in all its ordinary particular brightness, and somewhere above him on the 4th floor of a warm apartment, a boy was finishing his homework at the kitchen table, and a woman he had never stopped looking for was finally, quietly, home.